And then I started coming up with some interesting ideas for how to make carnivore dishes that were just really outside the box.
Chris, how did you find carnivore?
Wow. It was a little bit of a roundabout method of getting to the carnivore diet for me. So about 3.5 years ago, I guess, I was at a very low and dark place with my health and my life. And we'll get into some of the details of this in a minute, but I basically was dealing with what I now know was a diet induced depression and anxiety. And that goes back as long, honestly, as I can remember. I think the last time I remember maybe not having this thing that I kind of now understand was probably when I was 9 or 10 years old. And I just didn't realize this was something that I was dealing with. And so my wife now, she and I were dating at the time. We both were in this position where we had serious health issues. And we were like, we've got to get our lives together. We've got to feel better. This was when the pandemic was all starting and ramping up. And she and I were preparing to get married eventually, and all of this kind of stuff. We started taking a serious long look at our lives. And my parents actually had started doing keto for a while. And my dad knew of Dr. Barry, Dr. Ken Berry. And so he was telling me all about keto, and he was telling me about Dr. Barry and all this kind of stuff, saying, you should really look into this. And it took me a little while to come around. Sometimes kids don't want to always listen to their parents, especially after they're adult kids. And I actually had tried, my wife and I, at this point, we tried doing a 28-day juice fast because I had actually done it before, like raw vegan juice fast. And that's all you have for 28 days is these fresh pressed juices, veggie and fruit stuff and that kind of thing. And I didn't know anything about sort of the science behind keto or whatever. I had never heard of carnivore. And so we tried this, and about 3 weeks in, she just couldn't do it anymore. And we were noticing some benefits because we had stepped away from sort of the standard diet with all the junk food and fast food. And we're musicians. So, of course, it was late nights playing music at the bar, and somebody wants to buy you a beer, and you're eating bar food and those kinds of things. So we had stepped away from doing all that, and we had just started drinking these juices. So we did see some benefits just because we had removed so much other junk, but we were still struggling. And she, especially, was just hungry and struggling and just emotionally trying to deal with what was essentially a massive lack of nutrition. And I didn't understand this at that point in time, but I came home from work one day, and she was just beside herself, hungry, but trying not to say anything because she didn't want to make me fail. She didn't want to feel like she was making me fail at this thing we were doing. And I said, I don't care about this. And this is not the thing that we should be focused on. We need to be focusing on taking care of ourselves. And so we decided, we've been talking about going keto. We're just going to do it today. So we started out keto, and we did kind of lazy, dirty keto at first. And then as I started doing more research, I was watching Dr. Barry's videos, and I was watching Dr. Sean Baker, and I was watching like all of these different people in sort of the low carb space that everyone knows of. And we ended up, as I was doing this research, we ended up deciding, okay, we're going to go like strict clean keto because all the products and the fake sweeteners and stuff, those aren't good. So we cut all those out, and then we went strict clean keto. And we were losing weight, and we were feeling good, and all of this was great. Well, I was watching like hours and hours of Dr. Barry videos because he had been doing this for a long time. So he had all this backlog of videos for me to start researching. And in these videos, he was talking about carnivore because, he had transitioned from being keto at one point to becoming a carnivore. And he was talking about this, and I was like, well, this is a really interesting thing because I remember being a kid and really preferring like the burger patty and not wanting the bun and all of the toppings and all the other stuff that went with it. I just liked the meat. And I was like, well, I kind of relate to this. I've always preferred, meat to veggies since I had, probably been 7 or 8 or 9 years old that I could remember. And I either wanted meat or I wanted really bad for you high carb stuff. And the veggies and the fruit and all that kind of stuff, that wasn't really something I was that interested in when I was younger. So our wedding was coming up, and I turned to Ash and I said, I think I'd like to try this carnivore thing because I'd like to try to lose a little extra weight before the wedding photos. And for me at that point, it was just about weight loss. That was what I was really thinking of. Um, and so she said, okay, well, if you want to try it, like I'll support you in that. She's like, you do carnivore. I'm going to stick with the strict keto thing. And so I was like, okay, we're going to do this. So I went carnivore, and I would just make 3 portions of meat and then a portion of veggies. I'd have 2 versions of meat, and she would have 1 serving of meat and veggies. And we found this balance. So I started doing this, and I was watching all of these other videos on carnivore by different YouTubers and different people. And I sort of thought something was happening, but I didn't want to say anything because I thought, well, maybe it's all in my head. And then I said something to my wife, Ash, and I said, I think carnivore is doing something unexpected to me here. And she goes, well, I didn't want to say anything, but I agree with you. And this was about 2.5 weeks into being a carnivore. She goes, you wake up every day smiling. And as long as I've known you, I've never seen you do that. And it took me a second to just like wrap my mind around what she had just said, because that's what I was experiencing. I was finding this energy and this positivity and this lifting of that depression and anxiety that I had referenced. And I still didn't really know exactly what this was, but I knew something was different. And I did carnivore. We went through our wedding, and then I never dealt with what I now know was a severe carbohydrate addiction and a food like binge eating type issue. And, at one point in time, before we started doing keto, I was close to 400 pounds. And I probably was actually 400 pounds at some point. But, there comes a point, Dave, where you just stop getting on the scale because it's so depressing to see the number just every time. And I had stopped weighing for a long, long time. So I may have been over 400 pounds at some point. And I had gotten into all of this for weight loss. I didn't really understand that there were these other issues, being this anxiety and depression, and then also a severe carbohydrate addiction that had led me to be almost 400 pounds. So I ended up kind of going back off the rails because after our wedding, I let myself have a few things here and there. And, I got a little loosey goosey with my carnivore diet, and then it turned in back to a standard American diet very quickly. And because I love to cook, that's why I'm called Chris Cooking Nashville. I love to cook, and I got back into cooking all the things that I enjoyed cooking because I love feeding people. It's how I say I love you to people, as I cook for them. And I just kind of went back off the rails. I didn't gain all of my weight back, but I did gain a fair bit of it. And then back in January of this last year, I looked at Ash, and, we had been married for a little while, and, a couple of years almost. And I looked at her and I said, I am so unhealthy and I'm so overweight. We know what works. And I know specifically what carnivore does for me, not just for my health and my weight, but for my brain and my attitude, and like my irritability goes away and my depression goes away and anxiety goes, like all of these things are amazing on carnivore. And I was like, I know that we have a lot going on. We're getting ready to move, and we didn't have a lot of money at the time. And I was like, I really think I need to do this, because I was like, I'm not even going to be able to help us move. I won't be able to go up and down the stairs carrying stuff. And she was like, I agree. She said, you need to go back to carnivore and I need to go back to keto, because we know that's what works, and we just need to stick it this time and make it happen. So I decided I wanted to go back to carnivore. And more importantly, I needed a support system. I needed something to hold me accountable so that I could beat the carbohydrate addiction and the food issues that I had. So I started a YouTube channel called Chris Cooking Nashville. And I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do weekly health vlogs so that I can look back at all of the progress, and I can keep reminding myself why I do what I do. And then along the way, I've always wanted to have like a cooking show, or, be able to show people what I cook. And I was like, one of the things that really threw me off, I think the last time, I wanted certain foods, but I didn't ever try to make a recipe to satisfy the love of cooking that I had. I just tried to muscle my way through it and not in any way give in to anything and then not deal with the addiction issue that I had with carbohydrates. And it just kind of threw me into a tailspin. And so this time I was like, I don't want it to be a regular thing, but every now and then, if I'm at the point where I'm like really badly craving something, I want to try to make a carnivore version of it to stave off the craving instead of giving into it until I can fully beat this carb addiction. And because I'm doing this all on my health logs publicly, I have something I'm accountable to. And once I can hopefully get to the other side of that, then this won't be an issue anymore. At least that was my hope. So I started this channel and I started doing health logs and just a little bit here and there, dropping in a few things I was making, be it keto stuff for Ash or carnivore things for me. And at first it was like meat patties and eggs and steak and, different things. And I was doing some simple keto things for her. And then I started coming up with some interesting ideas for how to make carnivore dishes that were just really outside the box, like taking all the classic cooking technique that I've studied my entire life because I, loved watching like chefs all over the internet, and YouTube has made that so easy. And I started taking these ideas of like classic French technique and international recipes and figuring out, well, how would I apply the same techniques to carnivore ingredients to come up with a weird way of doing a carnivore version of whatever, I might be thinking of. And I started sharing it, putting it on YouTube, and a few people started watching. And then I actually reached out to Anita at Ketogenic Woman because I had been watching her recipes for a long time and just thinking, this is really cool. And she was kind of where I had this idea that, sometimes you can maybe make some things and it might help stabilize you so you can deal with this transition. I reached out to her, and I don't know what it was about my email I sent, but something about it just stood out to her, and she actually emailed me back. And she said, I watched your video for this carnivore gravy recipe that I had sent her using egg yolks as a way to thicken it instead of flour. And she was like, this is really cool, and I think people in the carnivore world need to see this. And so she featured a recipe of mine on one of her videos, and it jump-started my channel. And suddenly, I just grabbed that momentum in both my YouTube channel and in my carnivore diet. And I just kept going at all of this. And so I set the goal. I had already been, 3, 4, 5 months into it at this point. It's like, well, I'm going to go a full 365 days with no cheat meals. Like, I'm going to do this publicly and do this on my health logs. And so I did. And along the way, I created all these crazy recipes for carnivores that are, maybe a little more willing to play in the kitchen from time to time to kind of stave off cravings, and maybe people who are trying carnivore for the first time and they want to transition and be able to sort of stabilize themselves and get off of the carbohydrate addictions. And so it turned into this whole thing where now carnivore is basically like 95 to 98% what I do, plus coffee and spices. And then occasionally I have a few keto things, but I really, really limit that. And I do this recipe creation and I do these vlogs, and it all ties itself together to be this incredible carnivore journey that I've been doing now. And so I'm coming up on a year and a half now since the beginning of this whole thing.
That's awesome. So, a year and a half this time around, um, and you were feeling better in the mornings, but the depression, anxiety is completely lifted now?
Totally, totally. The only time that I ever feel anything like that is if I allow myself to have too many veggies, too many keto type things. My wife is actually currently in the process of doing her first month of carnivore. She's trying it for the first time, and yeah, she's enjoying it. She's starting to get this brain awakening thing happening too. And we were talking about this in the latest health vlog actually that we just recorded, and she is talking about how she even notices with me if I have like a keto thing, like maybe I have a salad or something with a meal. If that's the only thing I have and it's like 4 weeks later, I still haven't had any keto meals, no problem, I'm still good. But if I have like a keto meal and then 4 or 5 days later I have some more keto stuff, and then 4 or 5 days later I have some more keto stuff, and now I've had, let's say, 3 or 4 keto meals in the space of 2 to 3 weeks, I don't recognize it happening, and then suddenly I'll just notice one day I'm just like, this is just how I feel. And it's like it just sneaks up on me. And then I cut all that stuff out, and it takes me 2 to 3 weeks of all of that flushing. And suddenly it all lifts again and it all goes back away. So as long as I'm not doing the veggies and certainly no carbs, like the grains and all that kind of stuff, as long as I keep that stuff out, none of those feelings come back.
Regarding your weight, like where are you now with your weight? If your
Yeah.
starting point was about 400, so
Yeah, so my official starting point was 385, but I was definitely, I think, bigger than that at some point.
mm,
So it was somewhere up in that range of 385, 400. So the lowest I've seen is 253. I'm sort of hovering anywhere from that 255 to 260 range, because weight likes to fluctuate back and forth a few
mm,
pounds from here and there. And I've been doing carnivore for so long now, consistently, that the speed of the weight loss has really tapered off. I'm totally okay with that as well, because I know that the weight will come off when my body is ready to, as long as I'm doing the right things. But more importantly, all of this up here is still fantastic, and I feel good, and I'm loving my life, and I'm like, the rest of that extra weight will come off when it wants to. I don't feel any anxiety or any issues with that. So right around 255 to 260 is where I hover, and just waiting for the next chunk to start coming off.
and so regarding the cooking side of things, um, is cooking something you did professionally at any point during your life?
So I've never done professional cooking. My wife and I did own a micro bakery doing sourdough bread, like handmade sourdough breads, at the the tail end of the pandemic. Because as musicians, we basically lost everything when the pandemic hit and it shut down the entire music industry. We both lost our jobs. We both lost our music careers. We lost two different music businesses that we had developed. I taught guitar lessons and some different things. We lost the house we were living in. I mean, it was like when it rains, it pours, and it all happened. And so I ended up sort of accidentally starting a micro bakery making sourdough bread by hand, because you couldn't buy yeast in the store and bread shelves were empty for a while. And I got into doing this, and it just sort of accidentally turned into a business that helped get us through when we had no money coming in. And it was long before I knew what keto or any of that kind of stuff was. And so that's the only like commercial food type job I've ever had. I've worked as like a server, like waiting tables kind of thing, but I've never actually cooked professionally. It's something my mom taught me. It was passed down to her from my great grandmother, her mom's mom, who was just known far and wide for being an incredible cook, and family recipes and that kind of stuff. It's part of a cultural thing for us, and I've just always been really passionate about it. And I'm also a person that researches everything to absolutely the nth degree. Hence my keto and carnivore knowledge of hundreds of hours of watching Dr. Barry's videos. And I just have done that with food as well over my life. I'm a foodie, and I love trying new things and having different experiences with food. But I just have taught myself how to make a lot of things that I didn't already have access to easily around me, and kind of turned into a hobby that almost got out of control.
Do you love it enough that you're actually like you'll try and make elaborate kind of dishes at home for you and your wife for carnivore?
Yes, yes. I love being in the kitchen. I love being creative, and I really enjoy the idea of taking carnivore ingredients and seeing how far can we push them. Because I think it's funny. There are some people in the carnivore community that are very outspoken about, like, it should all be really simple, and I think that's cool. Like, for a lot of people, simple is generally best because it's quick. It's not going to drive some food addiction issue. Like, it's very straightforward, and most of the time that is the way Ash and I eat as well. Like, I cook steaks, I cook eggs, I cook meat patties, I cook salmon. Like, very simple most of the time. But every now and then I enjoy having fun in the kitchen, and I enjoy using these techniques and taking carnivore ingredients and saying, how far can we really push this? And it's kind of that food culture of, like, molecular gastronomy is all about how can we combine all these different things and these techniques to create wild dishes that even if they're reminiscent of something we all know and love, it's completely different. It's a totally unique approach. Like I've seen chefs that do things like they make transparent ravioli and you can see everything on the inside of them. You know what I mean? Like just crazy things. And so I took that sort of philosophy of, well, take the ingredients and the things that I know my body enjoys and figure out how far can you go with it. So one of the recipes I'm probably best known for is carnivore mashed potatoes, which are made with egg whites, and I use toasted beef gelatin, which gives it this earthy flavor. That's kind of like a potato, and it's got some dairy and some different things in there, and it's all blended up into this like egg pudding essentially. But because of the way it's seasoned and flavored, and the way you serve it with extra butter and all these kinds of things, it is, I mean, really, really incredible how much it just tastes like you're eating mashed potatoes. And I've had so many people tell me they serve it to their family, and their family is like, if you wouldn't have told me these aren't potatoes, I never would have known the difference. And you know, it's things like that. And I just released recently, this last weekend, we released a video on carnivore grits, also made with egg whites. But you know, grits are a cornmeal or like hominy or maize based porridge type dish, very popular in the South in the U.S. And you can't have all those carbs and feel good. You know, as a carnivore, that's a big no-no. But it's used to serve things like shrimp and grits is a real popular dish now in the U.S. and this kind of stuff. And I was like, I grew up, I've got roots in the North and the South on both sides of my family. And I was like, I grew up eating grits and I just miss this stuff. And I know Wes from Highfalutin Low Carb does a bunch of recipe testing. And one of his videos I saw, he did a keto grits battle. And I was like, I can do better. I think I can do. And so he tested a couple of recipes, and I was like, no, I got to come up with a carnivore version of this, which would be even lower carb and would be super super high protein and very filling and very satiating. And so I worked on it, and I came up with a carnivore version of grits made with these egg whites that are chopped up into grit size pieces and then slightly dehydrated, and it's a whole fun process, but it's such a blast to put these things together. So I made a carnivore shrimp and grits, and it was just one of the greatest things that I've ever made recipe wise. It's fantastic. And what's cool is when I do this with these recipes, even these fancier kind of carnivore recipes, there's so much protein and there's so much fat in these things because it's still made of like eggs, meat, butter, and then I use dairy a lot of times, but try not to go over the top on the dairy. But you do what you can. But it's like you get all of that stuff in there, and my body loves all that stuff no matter what form it's in. So I do all of that, and even these fancier dishes, you go to eat it, and it's like I can't eat that much of it because it is so satiating and it's so satisfying, and I feel so good after having that. When the original version of that, the real stuff, would have just made me feel so sick.
So is the mashed potatoes the most popular video you've got on your channel? The most popular recipe?
So the mashed potatoes are number two. Actually, the most popular
Oh,
video on my channel is my carnivore pizza crust. Everybody loves a good pizza, I guess, but I have a carnivore pizza crust, which is a egg whites and like egg yolks and butter and cream cheese, and you sort of combine this together almost like you would a souffle. This is where the whole French cooking technique comes in. You whip the egg whites and it's folded in with the other ingredients, and then you spread it out on a pan, bake it, and make like a par baked crust. I throw that in the freezer, and then I pull it out and I get a smoking hot pizza stone in my oven going, put the toppings on it, and I use, like an Alfredo style sauce and sausage, and you can get, sometimes clean pepperoni, like different kinds of things like that. Top it however you want, when, mozzarella cheese, whatever, and then slide that on the pizza stone, and you can get it a little crispy on the bottom, and it's fluffy and bread like in the middle, and it's all, as long as you can handle dairy, it's all carnivore ingredients, and it is super good. And that video blew up. People loved that one.
you mentioned that some chefs come up with things like transparent ravioli and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Which recipe that you've come up with do you feel is the most kind of ingenious or the most kind of unique?
Yeah, I would. I would say that's probably a tie. I think the mashed potatoes are definitely right there. The other one that I would say is probably similar would be my carnivore fried rice, and using egg whites and chopping them up into rice-sized pieces, and then you take like butter and you fry it, and as you dehydrate it, it gets more of a rice consistency, and then adding all the typical things in, you would get like a takeout style fried rice. Just leave out the veggies, and a lot of those other ingredients are very carnivore friendly, like meat and eggs. And I make a carnivore soy sauce that goes with it, which is a combination of beef broth, like a beef bone broth that is really really concentrated down thick, and I add shrimp powder, which is nothing more than just cured shrimp that's ground up into a powder, and you get that umami sort of a flavor in there that Asian cultures are so well known for using in their sauces and that kind of stuff. And you add a little splash of vinegar if you're willing to do that on a carnivore diet, for yourself, and it's just this incredible soy sauce. And most people that I've shown it to that have tasted it, they're like, it just tastes like soy sauce to me. So I've done the fried rice version with that, and I also did a carnivore sushi with a slightly different version of that rice where I use extra beef gelatin to glue it together, and I did carnivore sushi.
How cool is that? That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. What percentage of the food that you're eating is kind of you'll make yourself something elaborate like that versus just having a steak?
hmm so out of a week, probably 6 days, I'm having just very simple stuff. Like we're doing steaks, I'm doing a roast chicken, I'm doing like meat and a little bit of seasoning. One day a week, I'm filming a recipe video usually, and so we're eating whatever that recipe is. Sometimes a second day in the week, I may have part of that recipe because I might need to test it and make sure it's going to work the way I think it will before I then create the recipe video. So I would say every 6 or maybe 5.5 days, I'm eating very simply, and then like one day, maybe plus a little bit on a second day out of the week, I'm having the more elaborate type stuff.
And have you had to kind of renovate your kitchen to be able to accommodate like camera equipment and stuff so that you can film nicely?
Yes, yes, we have moved a lot of things around in the kitchen. So my wife herself very much admittedly hates to cook. So she basically has the entire house to do whatever she wants with, make it look how she wants, and most of it is guitars and music gear everywhere. But the kitchen is kind of my domain because the only thing she does is she goes in there to clean. She enjoys cleaning and doing dishes for whatever reason, always has, I guess, and so it works out really well because I love to cook. And so she basically is like, the kitchen is your domain. You make it however you want it to be. You put whatever you want in there. And then she just helps me decorate and arrange it to make it look nice for, being on video. But yeah, we've moved a lot of stuff around, and I have different companies reach out when you have a significant following on YouTube. There are companies that, of course, want you to pitch their product and review their whatever new gadget it is and that kind of stuff. And I don't do a lot of those, but every now and then a company that contacts me, it's like, this is one, something I would love for my own kitchen, but two, this looks like a really great company that a lot of people in the carnivore world might really enjoy using this thing. And so I'll be like, yeah, sure, send me one, and I'll do a video and review it. And so we get free kitchen gear like that. And there's always a battle of, okay, well, what's going to live on the counter, and what do we have the space for? And which is actually, it's kind of a cool thing because I've gotten several different things where different companies that have similar products have reached out to me and they want me to review it. And so I end up with like 3 air fryers simultaneously. And it's like, what am I going to do with 3 air fryers? So what I generally do is, different air fryers work maybe better for one thing and not quite as good on another thing. And so like it's not that one is better, they're just a little bit different. And the recipes that I really like to use, I will, use whatever product is best for that use of it in particular. But it's turned into this very cool thing where my wife and I get to go out and we get to bless other people with like, hey, I have 3 air fryers in the house. I don't need all 3. Would you like a free air fryer? And like maybe a family who doesn't have a whole lot, or I know we had a dish set. We upgraded our dish set to one that would look a certain way on camera, and we had this other dish set, perfectly good dish set. Just it was pure white, and it just washed out on video. And there was a family around here that their house got destroyed by a series of tornadoes that went through here in Middle Tennessee. And actually, I believe the lady's husband even was killed in that. And so she and her kids were suddenly without a home and without a husband and a father. And this friend of ours that we know who does photography and works with musicians and this kind of stuff, he also works with a nonprofit, and they do like charity type work, and they try to help people. And so we contacted him and we said, hey, we've got a bunch of kitchen gear and we've got a whole set of dishes and all this kind of stuff. Can you use it? And he was like, yeah, this lady just lost everything in her life, and we would love to be able to give her all this kind of stuff. We're trying to get them, stuff or whatever. And so we like swung by the store and got some stuff that they needed, and then we took this dish set and like some kitchen gear and things that they just didn't have any of this kind of stuff. And so it's actually turned into this cool thing where it's like I get to take care of my own health, and I get to run this YouTube channel, and then we get to bless other people with all of this stuff that companies need reviewed, and it's good quality stuff. We just don't have room for it. So it's a very interesting crossing of many wonderful things in our lives.
So you mentioned before that your wife's about a month into carnivore now. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
How is she faring a month in?
Yeah, so this is really cool for me to watch. So we're doing weekly health vlogs where she's like giving everybody her updates every week. But we just did week 3, and she's had like some of the typical things like bathroom issues and skin issues, and like your body is just pushing all this stuff out, which is incredible because she's been keto for a long time. And you would think like, well, she's keto, her body is already taken care of all of this, and apparently not, because it's pushing all this stuff out. And she's had like some random things like some joint pain, and like it just like it's like oxalate dumping symptoms basically. And I recognize them because I went through all of the exact same things the same way and almost at the same time frame as she did. And now this week on this past week was week 3, so we're into week 4. She is now like almost back to totally normal with like bathroom type stuff. Her skin is starting to clear up, and more than anything, she said, I want to try to stay carnivore and continue doing this because I'm finding this amazing mental energy and this focus and this emotional stability I didn't realize I would have. So she's doing really, really well, and she's really happy about it.
Yeah, that's good, and it's probably really good for her to have you there as support going, "Yeah, it's okay. I've been through this. It happens, just
Yeah.
don't worry."
Yeah, absolutely. She and I were talking about how it's like, she's really glad that I went through this stuff, because she's like, if I didn't know all of this, I would maybe very potentially freak out and think I should quit. And that's why we thought it was so important to do these health vlogs where it's like, I mean, she's being real and raw and honest with people. Like, here's what it's like as someone who does this for the very first time, sitting next to someone who's been doing this for a long time and runs a YouTube channel where I can like edit videos together so people can get a real good, YouTube friendly picture of it. So it's like the best of both worlds. You get someone who's brand new along with the experience of it having been done simultaneously. And so she's being very real, raw, and honest, and putting all of that information out there for people to see exactly what she's going through, so that if they start to experience these things, it's like, consult a doctor, as necessary, but don't freak out if some of these things happen. Like, it may actually be a really good thing because your body is letting go of all of this stuff that has been harming you for so many years.
So if someone was to ask you, um, Chris, I want to get onto this carnivore thing. I know this probably going to be hard at the beginning, but what would you recommend to make it as easy as possible?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that you have to ask yourself to figure out what is the best way to do this for you. And I think the first question you have to say is, am I an all or nothing person, or am I better at slow transition? Because if you're a cold turkey, do it overnight kind of person, I would say if that's what you prefer, cool. Go ahead, dive in, change your diet overnight. Just get ready for 2 to 4 weeks of potential misery. And you may not experience that, but just don't be, don't be weirded out if suddenly you're in the bathroom every 10 minutes and you're getting weird pains and like all this kind of like carnivore did not cause this stuff in a week. So we know that's not what it is. So it's like, let your body go through this. And if you're a cold turkey kind of person, you may go through it pretty roughly. So just grit your teeth and get through it, and you'll be a lot happier on the other side. If you're not that kind of person, and I suspect there's a lot of people that aren't, then I think the best thing you can do is you need to take a look at where your diet is currently. If you're eating like a standard American diet and you're trying to change that, okay, the first thing you need to do is cut out all the excess sugar and all the other stuff for like a week or two, because you're going to probably have some kickback from that. You're going to get some headaches and have some cravings and stuff, and you got to deal with that. Next thing to do would be to cut out like grains and fruits and other things that are excessively high carbs. Then the third thing to do, do that for a week or two, and then the next thing would be to cut out like any of the other sort of starchy veggies and those kinds of things, and get yourself onto essentially what would be a keto diet. And then if you say, okay, I'm really wanting to do carnivore and that's my goal, then go from keto for a couple of weeks into carnivore. And, when you go carnivore the first time, there are so many things that you are already trying to change in yourself. And if you're one of those people who needs to transition, beating yourself up over every single little tiny possible detail you can imagine existing is not going to be helpful. So do the best you can, of course. Be as clean as you can. Try to get off of that stuff and do the research and inform yourself. But man, make sure that you love yourself enough to know that it's okay if you're not perfect at this at first. And if you screw up a little or you step off that path or whatever, that's okay. Go right back to it the next day. And you know what? If you're craving something and you're struggling and you're like, I feel like I'm going to just, lose control here, go make a Chris Cooking Nashville carnivore pizza. It's a whole lot better than going down the road to the Domino's or Pizza Hut or whatever else and getting their stuff and going off the rails. And it's like, is things like a carnivore pizza and the carnivore grits and the heavy dairy type stuff that tends to be in these kinds of recipes, is that ideal to eat every single day of a carnivore diet? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a nutrition expert here, but probably not, because we seem to see a lot of evidence that that's not something you should do regularly. But you know what? If you need to do that a couple, 3 nights a week at the beginning so that you feel like you can do this and it encourages you to stick with it, go for it. That's a whole lot better than going down to whatever fast food joint it is you want to go to, or going to the supermarket and buying out the freezer section of every pizza that they've got. Or everyone has their vices, right? The snack cakes, the sodas, the pizza, the pasta. There's something. Everybody has it. So it's like, whatever that thing is, find your workaround and don't fight your own tendencies. Work with your own tendencies and give yourself the grace to transition and get better at this a day at a time. It's little tiny baby steps to greatness. And as you get off all that other stuff and this mental awakening stuff happens, because your body starts to function and all the toxins come out, and you get clear and you get empowered to do this kind of stuff, it gets a lot easier to focus on, how do I take steps from where I am to chase where I want to be without beating myself up if I can't do it perfectly every single day. And I think that's the thing that I would say, no matter what you're doing, whether it's cold turkey overnight or whether you're a slow transition person or anywhere in between, if you expect perfection out of yourself, you're going to make it a lot harder and more stressful. Just don't give up, because yes, what you're doing is the right thing to do to go carnivore, in my opinion anyway, but it doesn't mean you have to do it so perfectly that there's just never any struggle or any of that. I mean, I struggle. I think anyone who's ever done this has had their moments where they struggle, whatever that looks like for each person, and that's okay. So, just know that you're doing it because you're worth doing it, and take the steps one day at a time and just try to do a little better each day.
Really nice advice. So, Chris, how can we find your channel?
Yeah, so if you go to YouTube, and you search Chris Cooking Nashville, I will probably be the first thing in camo that pops up. And if you can't find me there, you can always go to chriscookingnashville.com. And you can also find me at Chris Cooking Nashville on like Facebook and Instagram and those kinds of places. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the redneck wearing the camo and denim and all that kind of stuff all the time, usually with a guitar in my hands.
Awesome. I'll link to those below. And Chris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and all these delicious sounding recipes. It's been really
Yeah.
good to have you on.
Well, thank you, Dave. I just want to say I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the work that you do because I've been watching you for a long time, actually, too. And I appreciate how much work you do to put this information out there because it encourages people like me. And we appreciate good people like you in the space. Makes it all worthwhile.